After using Windows computers for pretty much my entire life, this self-described Apple hater did something a little bit unusual. About 10 days ago, I picked up this M4 Macbook Air to complement my Windows desktop. So this marks the first time I've tried to live with macOS on a daily basis, and I thought since the return window on this thing is closing pretty soon, so I don't forget what the experience was like using a Mac, just in case I decide to take it back, I decided to make this video just kind of highlighting the things I don't like about macOS, as well as some of the things I don't like about this hardware in particular, and I might have even found a few things I do like about it. Just for some quick background info on me, I've been doing the full-time YouTube thing for about 4.5 years or so over on the other channel, and I tend to do most of my work for that channel over on the desktop over there. I've got a 3-monitor setup. There's lots of screen real estate. I generally don't like working on small screens like a laptop. However, I do travel about 5 or 6 times a year, and I sometimes need to take my laptop with me when I'm just out and about in the city on the go, just to get some work done and stuff like that. So that's what brought me to the MacBook Air. These things are really thin, they're really light, they have incredible battery life, and they're supposedly good for a lot of creative workflows, at least video work that isn't super complicated, which is pretty much what I do. So that reputation is what got me to swap out the Lenovo for this M4 MacBook Air. So I've been trying to use this machine as much as possible over the past 10 days just to get a feel for it and decide if I want to keep it or not. I even edited a video I recorded at a coffee shop and I rendered it out there as well, all while on battery, which is super impressive. For the most part, things work pretty much the same as they do in Windows, although some things are different, and with Apple devices, you kind of get this feeling that things are different just for the sake of being different, often in a way that's less intuitive or less logical, at least based on how my brain is wired, but for the most part, it's fine, and most of the differences aren't really a big deal. This is more or less things that bother me in just daily use or in general about macOS, enough to make me reconsider wanting to live with this computer. So right when I opened this thing up, one of the first things I did was I hooked up a Bluetooth mouse, and I almost immediately found the first thing that really bugged me about macOS, and I had no idea this was a problem. So unlike Windows and Linux and pretty much every operating system known to man, on macOS, for some bizarre reason, mouse scrolling and trackpad scrolling are tied together. So just to clarify what I mean, in macOS, it's impossible to have natural scrolling on your trackpad, but have it turned off on your mouse, even though there's 2 separate settings for them. If you change one, the other changes with it, even though nowhere on the mouse settings screen does it tell you it's going to be changing your trackpad settings as well. What the hell are you doing, Apple? Why do I have to download an app just so I can scroll web pages with my mouse properly? Ah yes, Finder versus Explorer, a debate as old as time itself. I'm just going to say it, Finder kind of low-key sucks compared to Explorer. For instance, in icon view, you can't see the file size just by clicking on the file. You have to get the file info or change to a list view, which for me kind of sucks because I prefer icon view. Also, for some reason on macOS, you can't see the bitrate or frames per second of a file without actually opening it up in a media player and digging around for that info within that player. And this is particularly annoying for someone who works with a lot of video files. On Windows, you just fly into the properties, and right there it shows you the resolution, the length, the bitrate, and frames per second of a given file. And in general, I just find Windows Explorer a lot faster and more intuitive to navigate around, but really, Finder is fine. It just kind of sucks. Which brings us to the dock versus the taskbar. To me, the Windows taskbar is way better. It packs way more useful information on it with added controls and notifications on the taskbar itself. And it seems most people on their Macs tend to hide their dock, whereas most Windows users tend to leave their taskbar on the screen. I would chalk that up to the taskbar being less intrusive and better implemented. Also, why the hell does clicking on the date not open up the calendar? I have to find and launch the calendar app just to do that? That's pretty dumb. If you're like me and you have your dock set to auto hide, in order to get it to pop up and reveal itself, all you have to do is bring your mouse cursor down to the bottom of the screen and it springs right up, which is great. Except if you're in full screen mode, in which case, when you bring your mouse cursor to the bottom of the screen, often nothing will happen. Sometimes it'll pop up, sometimes it won't. Sometimes I'm waving the mouse cursor around the bottom like an idiot, hoping to summon it. It was only after using the Mac for several days was I able to figure out how to get the dock to reliably pop up when you're in full screen mode. What you have to do is scroll your mouse cursor to the bottom of the screen and then keep going as if you're trying to scroll it a few inches below the screen, and then it'll pull up. I have no idea what the logic is here in having it behave differently when you're in full screen mode versus not full screen mode, but I guess that's Apple for you. And I'm not a fan of Apple's traffic light approach, those red, yellow, and green dots you see at the top left of every screen. I've found the different traffic light behavior for different apps can be different for some reason, and the red light doesn't actually close the app. You still have to go to the dock and manually shut it down, which is pretty stupid. One thing Apple does pretty shit-tastically is the Clipboard, although given how long it took them to bake, copy, and paste into iOS, I guess that's not really a surprise. For instance, the very commonly used cut function is not built into the Mac context menus. Why the hell not? Also, why the hell is there no copy and paste history? On Windows, I don't have to think, am I overwriting something important when I copy something new to the clipboard? Because if I do, I can just hit Win-V and my copy and paste history will show up and I can go through that, including images, and just find what it is I need. But on Apple, as soon as you copy over something, it just disappears into thin air. As a Windows user, you are constantly hearing from Apple users how glorious their trackpads are and why they never need touchscreens because the trackpads are so good. Well, I'm willing to bet the app used by most people on Macs is Google Chrome, and on that app specifically, the trackpad is total shit. For some reason, pinch to zoom seems to work maybe 70 or 80% of the time in Chrome. Look at this, I'm trying to zoom in, but it's not responding at all. And I'm thinking, am I holding it wrong? Is it not reading my fingers? Like, what's going on here? Yeah, it works perfectly in Safari and Firefox and decently well on Microsoft Edge, which is kind of bizarre since it's Chromium based. And even though this is probably Google's fault, who cares who's to blame? The user experience on what is by far the most used web browser on planet Earth kind of sucks on Mac if you're using a trackpad. I also find Chrome in general to be more sluggish on this MacBook than on my Windows machines, which is made even worse by the fact that it's got this 60 hertz screen and scrolling just kind of feels extra choppy on it. One thing you can't do on macOS that I found super annoying is you can't change the volume on individual apps, at least not easily from macOS itself. And another thing I use all the time that I find just to be so much better on Windows is the snipping tool. I'm always taking screenshots of things and then drawing notes or doodles on them and then just copying that straight to the clipboard or saving it to a file. But on Mac, every time I try to use the built-in snipping feature, it saves a file to my desktop that I have to go and clean up later. What if I only want to put it straight on the clipboard? Fortunately, on Mac, I found an app called Lightshot, which decently mimics the features of the Windows snipping tool. It's still not quite as good, but it's way better than what Apple built in. And while it's not a huge deal, I hate that there's always a menu bar at the top of the screen, and there's no real way to hide it. So that's it for the main gripes I have about the software so far, but what about the hardware itself? Well, it's actually pretty good, but there are a few things I really don't like about this system. One of them being a screen. This was $1,699 Canadian, and yet it comes with a Stone Age 60 hertz screen. Honestly, once you're used to a higher refresh rate screen, scrolling around on it just kind of feels like a flip book. It is really jarring and kind of hard to watch. Another thing I really don't like is you can't see it because I hid it with an app, but there's a hideous notch at the top of the screen. It doesn't have Face ID or any real reason to exist other than Apple trying to make it look like they're ugly phones. So that is kind of annoying. And another thing is the screen is not touch. I just got so used to using a touch screen on my Windows computers. That one is not a huge deal. It's not as big a deal as I thought it would be, but I definitely miss having a touch screen. As for the port selection, it is a MacBook Air, but it is pretty weak sauce. You get two USB-C ports, both of which you can charge from, and a MagSafe port. And over on this side, a headphone jack. It would be super nice to have at least one more USB-C port over on the right side, especially since you have to charge your computer from this side, but sometimes you're just in a position where you need to plug it into this side, and you can't do that with this one, so that kind of sucks. Also, no micro SD card reader, which would be super handy, but Apple doesn't want to bring creators over to the airline. They like upcharging those ones to buy MacBook Pros. And what else? It's a fingerprint magnet, but I don't really care about that, but I know a lot of people do. And on the topic of no Face ID, I find Windows computers with ARM processors and Windows Hello are able to securely open up and unlock the system even faster than the MacBook Air with its fingerprint reader. This is a Windows ARM-based laptop. I think it's got a Snapdragon Elite X processor, and when I open it up, we are already in. It used my face to securely unlock it and just instantly spring to life. So it's kind of funny that Apple, the company that brought us Face ID on their iPhones and created that hideous notch to bring Face ID, moved that notch over to their MacBooks, but you still have to use your fingerprint to open it. And the current method is ironically slower than what you can do and less convenient on a modern Windows laptop. I think the biggest thing that sucks about this hardware is just the extortionate upgrade prices. This is 512 gigs of storage and 16 gigs of memory. I wanted the 24 gig of memory model, but Apple wanted 300 Canadian dollars to go from 16 gigs to 24 gigs. By contrast, if you go to the Lenovo website, on this particular model, if you want to go from 16 gigs to 32 gigs, so that's not 8 more gigs, that's 16 more gigs, Lenovo only wants 93 Canadian dollars. 93 Canadian dollars for 16 gigs of RAM, or $300 for 8 gigs of RAM. There's no other way to put it. That is criminal. Apple should not even be allowed to do that. Their RAM is not faster. It's not sprinkled with some type of magic pixie dust. It's not better than Lenovo's. They're just straight up stealing from you. There's really no other way to put it. But that aside, what do I like about this thing? Well, the OS design language is generally consistent. Windows kind of has some janky looking ancient menus and UI elements that are often redundant and found in newer menus that have been baked into newer versions of Windows, which makes the whole thing feel kind of incomplete. You definitely have a lot less of that going on macOS. The battery life is amazing. They advertise up to 18 hours. I haven't quite gotten that much out of it, but I did edit and render out an entire 40-minute long 4K video, and that only used up, I want to say, 15 to 20% of the battery, whereas on my old x86 Windows laptop, that would have pretty much nuked the entire battery. So the battery life is amazing. Also, complaints about Chrome aside, the trackpad is amazing. It just works really good, and it's got these kind of force touch haptic feedback motors in it that are just incredible. It feels like you're physically clicking down on something, but you're not. It's all an illusion. So I just screwed up whatever is on my screen by clicking around, but props to Apple for doing that. I wish there was just a button that minimized everything to the desktop and took me straight to the desktop. There's a way to see the desktop. There's no way to just to send everything flying down to the dock and minimize it though, unlike Windows. So that's another thing that kind of sucks that I just ran into right now. Also, even though this only has 16 gigs of RAM and there is no active cooling, it kind of handles my 4K timelines and renders them out with ease. Like, it is remarkably powerful, and I don't think I'm going to need a MacBook Pro or something with active cooling if this thing exists. It is fantastic at what I need it to do. So I've only got a few days left to decide if I'm going to return or keep the MacBook. And I also have to decide on this Lenovo Slim Pro 7X. Yes, I've been supposedly giving the MacBook a fair shake over the past 10 days or so, and that is true, but I was so frustrated with macOS when I first got it that I kind of ran out and bought this. Well, I was frustrated with it, but I was in love with the battery life. I was in love with how it went in and out of standby so seamlessly. And Windows does have computers with those qualities. They're the Snapdragon Elite processor series, and I got this one. And this, honestly, the hardware is a superior value to the MacBook. It's a 14.5-inch OLED screen. It goes up to 1,000 hertz. It blows this thing out of the water. It's a better screen, in my opinion, than what's on the MacBook Pro. The battery life is better. The standby is just as good. All the apps that I use, this thing runs just as well. It benchmarks really well. But I knew almost within an hour of setting it up, I had to take it back. Why? The Snapdragon Elite X does not run DaVinci Resolve all that well right now. It is just too choppy and jumpy on the timeline. There's still some serious teething issues with that processor, but I'm super excited for what's coming next. I do think that if I do keep the MacBook Air, which I'm kind of leaning towards doing, when the next generation of Windows Snapdragon chips come out, I'm probably going to be all over that and saying goodbye to MacBook, to the MacBook. But yeah, that was kind of a deal breaker. It doesn't do the one thing I really need it to do well, and the MacBook absolutely excels at the one thing I need it to do. So that's another thing I like about it. Also, this one, I suspect one of the reasons why it was so cheap, I don't know if you can see this that well, but it's got this really janky French-Canadian keyboard. The shift key is cut in two, and my muscle memory, no matter how hard I try, just can't train myself to hit the outer part of what should be the shift key. It's broken up into this smaller piece, and my finger keeps hitting there, and when I try to reach for this, I always hit the caps lock. Also, the enter or return key is like vertical, and I'm constantly missing that. I tried to type on it and I just couldn't, and I just know that that's not something my muscle memory is going to be able to overcome. But other than that, and the fact that the MacBook has a way better trackpad, this is better hardware. It looks better, it feels better, it's got a better battery, it does everything I need to do, or I need it to do, as good as the Mac, except for my video editing software, which is really disappointing. But I really don't want a Windows x86 laptop. I love the battery life you get out of ARM. I love the fact that you get full power on battery life, whereas on an x86 laptop with a modern AMD or Intel chip to do things like video rendering and editing and that type of thing, you really have to be plugged in to get full power. And if you're not plugged in, they will throttle and you'll lose your battery life pretty quickly. So yeah, in a nutshell, I'm going to try to take this back tomorrow, which means right after this video, I'm going to start resetting Windows to get it in shape to bring it back to Best Buy. I have a feeling that was so cheap because of those damn French keyboards. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Mac. A lot of issues with macOS, some issues with the hardware, but overall, as a secondary computer, I would not want to live with macOS as my primary computer. Thank goodness I've got my beastly desktop over there, but I'm kind of happy with it. I'm kind of leaning towards keeping it, and I might be going on a pretty long trip pretty soon and solely relying on this. Well, not solely relying. I'll probably set up TeamViewer if TeamViewer is available on Mac and remote into my desktop. But those are my experiences with this. Let me know what you think about macOS down below if you've ever had the unfortunate pleasure of using one of these things. The hardware is great, but the software sure has its quirks. Boy, does it ever. But anyways, I've rambled on too long about this. Thanks for watching, guys. Yoink.